Welcome to Mystery Theatre. Tonight, we venture into the gilded drawing rooms of Belgravia, where wealth whispers and jealousy simmers beneath polished smiles. Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective, has been summoned to advise on a delicate matter of suspected theft. But when death arrives wrapped in satin ribbon and nestled in a box of exquisite chocolates, our detective finds himself confronting a far darker puzzle. Join us for The Chocolates of Death, a tale of greed, betrayal, and poison most cunningly administered, crafted in homage to the masterful Agatha Christie, whose genius we honour, though this mystery unfolds on our own terms. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you joining us from tonight? Your presence illuminates our journey through these shadowed mysteries. Now, let the story unfold. Chapter 1. The gift I have often reflected that the most dangerous things in this world come wrapped in the prettiest packages. A truth I should have remembered that grey February afternoon when Hercule Poirot and I first crossed the threshold of Ashworth House. The residence occupied a commanding position on Eaton Square, its white stucco facade gleaming even beneath the leaden London sky. It was the sort of house that announced its owner's wealth with quiet confidence. No ostentation, merely the unmistakable patina of old money carefully tended across generations. An impressive establishment, Poirot, I remarked as we mounted the steps. My friend adjusted his silk scarf with characteristic precision. Indeed, Hastings, the widow Ashworth, she has maintained the standards of her late husband's family. Though one wonders at what cost to her peace of mind, no? Before I could inquire as to his meaning, the door swung open to reveal a butler of such impeccable bearing that he might have been carved from the same stone as the house itself. Monsieur Poirot, Mrs. Ashworth is expecting you. If you would follow me, sir. We were led through a marble-floored entrance hall adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, then into a drawing room that exemplified refined English taste. Pale blue walls, delicate furniture upholstered in cream silk, and French windows overlooking a small but immaculate garden. A fire crackled in the grate, casting warm light across the oriental carpet. 3 persons occupied the room, and I took swift inventory of each as we entered. The woman who rose to greet us could only be Mrs. Millicent Ashworth herself. She was perhaps 60 years of age, though she carried her years with elegant defiance. Her silver hair was arranged in perfect waves. Her dove-grey dress spoke of expense without vulgar display, and her blue eyes, though shadowed with some private concern, held unmistakable intelligence. Monsieur Poirot, she said, extending a hand adorned with a single magnificent diamond. How good of you to come so quickly. I confess I feel rather foolish, troubling you over what may be nothing at all. Madame, Hercule Poirot does not judge the nature of a problem until he has examined it with his own eyes. He took her hand with a small bow. You mentioned in your letter a matter of some delicacy concerning missing items? Yes, though missing may be too strong a word. Misplaced, perhaps. She gestured towards the other occupants. Allow me to introduce my household. My nephew, Gerald Ashworth. The young man who stepped forward was perhaps 30, with the kind of aristocratic features that might have been handsome, were they not marred by a certain petulant softness about the mouth. His handshake was perfunctory, his eyes assessing us with barely concealed irritation. I still maintain, Aunt Millicent, that this is all rather excessive, he said. A few misplaced trinkets hardly warrant calling in a detective of Monsieur Poirot's reputation. And my companion, Miss Olivia Crane, Mrs. Ashworth continued, as though her nephew had not spoken. The young woman who rose from the escritoire in the corner presented a marked contrast to the room's elegance. She was perhaps 25, plainly dressed in serviceable brown, with mousy hair pulled back severely from a face that might have been pretty teeth had it not been so pinched with anxiety. She clutched a leather-bound notebook to her chest, as though it were a shield. "How do you do?" she murmured, barely meeting our eyes. "Miss Crane serves as my secretary and general assistant," Mrs. Ashworth explained. "I don't know how I should manage without her. She has been with me these 3 years now." "A most valued position," Poirot observed, and I noticed how his sharp eyes lingered on the young woman's nervous hands. "And the nature of these misplaced items, madame?" Mrs. Ashworth resumed her seat and gestured for us to do likewise. "Small things at first. A silver photograph frame, a pair of earrings, not terribly valuable, but of sentimental worth. I thought nothing of it. In a house this size, objects do sometimes wander. But last week," she hesitated. "Please, continue. My mother's cameo brooch. It has been in the family for 4 generations. I keep it in my dressing table, and I noticed its absence only when I wished to wear it to a charity luncheon." Her composure flickered. "I cannot believe any member of my household would take such a thing, and yet it is gone," Poirot finished gently. "Aunt Millicent refuses to consider the obvious explanation," Gerald interjected. He had taken up a position by the fireplace, one elbow resting on the mantel in studied nonchalance. "She's had a parade of workmen through here in the past month. Painters, plumbers, what have you. Any one of them might have pocketed something." "That is possible, certainly." Poirot's tone remained neutral. "Tell me, madame, who else resides in this house?" "Besides Gerald and Miss Crane, only the servants. Hopkins, whom you met, he has been with the family for 30 years. Mrs. Finch, the cook, and 2 maids, Ellen and Rose, all of impeccable character. And visitors? You entertain, perhaps?" A shadow crossed Mrs. Ashworth's face. "I host a small gathering each Sunday afternoon. Friends, neighbours, nothing elaborate, tea and conversation." "The famous Ashworth Salon," Gerald said with a faint sneer. "Half of Belgravia competing for an invitation." "That will do, Gerald." Mrs. Ashworth's voice carried sudden steel. "To Poirot," she added, "my late husband was a great collector of art and antiquities. Since his death, I have maintained his tradition of gathering like-minded individuals. There are perhaps a dozen regular attendees. I should like a list of these guests, if you please. Miss Crane can provide that." Mrs. Ashworth glanced at her secretary, who nodded and made a notation in her book. "But surely you cannot think these are people I have known for years." "I think nothing yet, madame. I merely gather information." Poirot rose and began a slow circuit of the room, his eyes missing nothing. "This is a beautiful home. Many valuable objects I see. This Sèvres vase, for example, and that painting, a Turner, unless I am mistaken." "You are not mistaken. My husband acquired it at his auction in 1895. And yet small items disappear, while such treasures remain untouched." Poirot paused before a side table near the French windows. Upon it sat an ornate silver box, perhaps 8 inches square, its lid decorated with an intricate pattern of roses. "This is exquisite. May I?" "Of course." He lifted the lid to reveal the box's contents. 2 layers of chocolates nestled in fluted paper cups, each one a small work of art. Dark chocolate domes, milk chocolate squares adorned with crystallized violets, truffles dusted with cocoa powder. "From Monsieur Beaumont," Mrs. Ashworth said, with a slight warming of her voice. "The most exclusive chocolatier in London. His creations are legendary." "They arrived this morning," Miss Crane offered quietly. "A gift." Poirot's eyebrow lifted. "A gift? From whom?" A pause. Mrs. Ashworth and her nephew exchanged a glance that I could not quite interpret. "From Victor Hartley," Gerald said flatly. "My aunt's admirer." "Gerald! Well, it's true, isn't it? The man has been paying court to you for 6 months, sending flowers, attending every salon, making a thorough nuisance of himself. And now chocolates." Mrs. Ashworth's cheeks coloured. "Mr. Hartley is a friend, nothing more. He knows of my fondness for Beaumont's confections, and thought to give me pleasure. There is nothing improper in it." "The gentleman, he is wealthy?" Poirot inquired. "Comfortable, I believe. He is a wine merchant, quite successful." Mrs. Ashworth's tone had grown stiff. "I fail to see what this has to do with my missing brooch." "Forgive me, madame. I am merely curious by nature." Poirot closed the chocolate box with care. "These are very fine. You have sampled them?" "Not yet. They only arrived a few hours ago." "Then I shall not spoil your anticipation." He resumed his seat, steepling his fingers in the manner I knew so well. "Now, let us discuss the circumstances of each disappearance in detail. The photograph frame. When did you first notice it missing?" For the next half-hour, Poirot methodically extracted information about each lost item. When it had last been seen, who had access to the room in question, what events had occurred in the household around the time of its disappearance. Mrs. Ashworth answered with precision, consulting occasionally with Miss Crane, who kept meticulous records of the household's daily activities. Gerald, I noted, grew increasingly restless as the interview progressed, checking his pocket watch with pointed frequency. "I'm afraid I have a prior engagement," he announced finally. "If you'll excuse me, Aunt Millicent." "Of course, dear. Dinner is at 8. Will you be joining us?" "Unlikely." He nodded curtly to Poirot and myself. "Gentlemen," when he had gone, Mrs. Ashworth sighed. "You must forgive my nephew. He has been unsettled of late." "He resides here permanently?" Poirot asked. "For the past year. His father, my husband's younger brother, left him very little, I'm afraid. Poor investments. Gerald came to stay with me while he sorts out his affairs." Her expression suggested this sorting was not proceeding swiftly. "And his affairs? They require capital, perhaps?" Mrs. Ashworth met Poirot's gaze steadily. "If you are asking whether Gerald might have taken my brooch to settle debts, Monsieur Poirot, I have considered the possibility. It pains me greatly, but I cannot believe it of him. He has his faults, certainly, but he is family." "Family," Poirot murmured. "Yes. The bonds of blood. They complicate everything, do they not?" A maid appeared at the door, a fresh-faced girl who bobbed a curtsy. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but there's a Mr. Hartley to see you." Mrs. Ashworth's hand flew to her hair in an unconscious gesture of feminine vanity. "Oh, I wasn't expecting, that is, show him in, Ellen." The man who entered moments later was not what I had expected. Given Gerald's disdainful references, I had imagined some oily fortune hunter. But Victor Hartley was a well-preserved 60, with a strong jaw, honest brown eyes, and the ruddy complexion of a man who enjoyed the outdoors. His greeting to Mrs. Ashworth was warm but respectful, and when introduced to us, his handshake was firm. "Monsieur Poirot, I've read of your cases in the papers. An honour to Sir." He turned to our hostess with evident pleasure. "I came to inquire whether my small gift had arrived safely." Beaumont was concerned about the cold affecting the chocolates during transit. It arrived perfectly, thank you. Mrs. Ashworth gestured towards the silver box. I've been saving them for after dinner. Excellent. I had him include your favourites, the violet creams. He makes them only for his most discerning customers. There was genuine fondness in his voice, and I observed Mrs. Ashworth softening under his attention. Whatever her protestations, this was clearly more than simple friendship. You will stay for tea? She asked for. I should be delighted. As Miss Crane slipped out to arrange refreshments, Poirot caught my eye. In that brief glance, I read what his little grey cells were already processing. The missing valuables, the devoted nephew with debts, the wealthy widow with a suitor, the nervous secretary, and now those gleaming chocolates in their silver box. Something was not right in this elegant house. I felt it as clearly as Poirot did. We could not know, as the tea things were laid out and polite conversation resumed, that death was already waiting in the wings, wrapped in satin ribbon and nestled among crystallized violets. Chapter 2. A Sweet Demise. The summons came 3 days later, and it came with urgency. I was breakfasting alone at our rooms in Whitehaven Mansions. Poirot, having risen early for what he termed his constitutional, a leisurely stroll to the patisserie on the corner, followed by an equally leisurely consumption of croissants. When the telephone rang, I answered it with my mouth still full of toast. Captain Hastings? The voice was female, trembling. This is Olivia Crane, from Ashworth House. I swallowed hastily. Miss Crane, what is it? Mrs. Ashworth, a choked sound. She's dead. Please, you must come at once, and bring Monsieur Poirot. The police are here, but I don't trust— Please, Captain Hastings, please come. The line went dead. By the time Poirot returned, I had already summoned a taxi. His expression, upon hearing my hurried explanation, grew very still. Dead, he repeated, and Miss Crane, she specifically requested our presence? She sounded terrified, Poirot, absolutely terrified. Then we must not delay. The journey to Eaton Square seemed interminable, though in truth it could not have taken more than 20 minutes. Poirot sat in silence, his fingers drumming against his knee, a sure sign of mental agitation. The chocolates, I said suddenly. You don't think— I think nothing, Hastings. Not yet. But I confess, those chocolates have occupied my thoughts since we left Ashworth House. There was something, how shall I say, too perfect about their arrival. A police constable stood guard at the front door, but our names had evidently been added to an approved list, for he admitted us without difficulty. Inside, the house that had seemed so serene 3 days prior now buzzed with grim activity. Uniformed officers moved through the hallway, and I caught a glimpse of a police photographer ascending the stairs. Hopkins, the butler, appeared as if conjured. His patrician composure remained intact, but I noted a greyish pallor beneath his usual dignified bearing. Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, Miss Crane is in the morning room. She has been most anxious for your arrival. And the police? Who is in charge? Inspector Jameson, sir. He is currently in Mrs. Ashworth's bedroom, where— Hopkins paused, his throat working— where the body was discovered. By whom? By Ellen, sir, the housemaid. At 7 o'clock this morning, when she brought Mrs. Ashworth's tea tray. The butler's voice dropped. Ellen is in quite a state, as you might imagine. We shall speak with her presently. First, Miss Crane. The morning room was a smaller, less formal space than the drawing room, decorated in cheerful yellows that seemed obscene under the circumstances. Miss Crane sat hunched on a settee, her plain face blotched with tears, her hands twisting a sodden handkerchief. She rose when we entered. "Monsieur Poirot, thank God you've come." "Mademoiselle." Poirot took her hands gently and guided her back to the settee. "You must calm yourself. Tell me everything." "I don't know everything. I only know—" She drew a shuddering breath. "Mrs. Ashworth retired early last night, around 9 o'clock. She said she had a headache and wished to rest. That wasn't unusual. She often suffered from headaches. I offered to bring her some aspirin, but she said she had some in her room. And this morning, Ellen went up with the tea tray at 7, as always. She knocked, received no answer, and entered." Miss Crane's voice cracked. Mrs. Ashworth was in bed. Ellen thought she was sleeping, but when she drew the curtains and turned back, the face, Monsieur Poirot. Ellen said the face was— I understand you need not continue. But I had seen enough death in my years to fill in the unspoken details. A face contorted in agony suggested poison, and a particularly unpleasant one at that. "The chocolates," I said. "Were they—" Miss Crane nodded miserably. "The box was on her nightstand, open. Several chocolates had been eaten. The police have taken it away." Poirot's eyes glittered. "And Mr. Gerald? Where was he last night?" "He dined out. I don't know what time he returned. I was in my room by 10. But he's here now. The police have asked everyone to remain in the house." "And Mr. Hartley? Has he been informed?" I hadn't thought." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Oh, this is dreadful. Who would do such a thing? Mrs. Ashworth was the kindest, most generous. She took me in when I had nothing, gave me a position, treated me almost like a daughter." Her grief seemed genuine, but I caught Poirot observing her with that peculiar intensity that meant his little grey cells were hard at work. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "I must ask you a difficult question. The chocolates, did anyone besides Mrs. Ashworth eat from that box?" Miss Crane shook her head. "No. She offered them to us at tea the day they arrived, the day you visited, but Mr. Gerald declined, and I don't care for chocolate. It gives me a rash." "Convenient," I muttered, earning a sharp glance from Poirot. "And the box remained in the drawing-room?" "Until yesterday evening. Mrs. Ashworth took it upstairs with her when she retired. She said she might have 1 or 2 before bed." "1 or 2, Poirot repeated thoughtfully. "Yet you say several were eaten." "The police counted. 6 were missing from the box." A heavy tread in the hallway announced the arrival of Inspector Jameson. A burly man with ginger whiskers and the weary expression of one who has seen too much of human depravity. He entered the morning room with a nod of recognition. "Monsieur Poirot, I wondered when you'd turn up. Miss Crane here insisted on sending for you." "You have objections, Inspector?" "None at all. Frankly, I could use a second opinion. This one's nasty." He jerked his thumb towards the ceiling. "The doctor's just finished his preliminary examination. Poison, no doubt about it. Cyanide, he thinks, based on the physical signs. Fast-acting, but not instantaneous. The victim would have had a few minutes of considerable distress." I felt my stomach turn. Poor Mrs. Ashworth, that elegant, dignified woman, dying alone in agony. "And the chocolates are your presumed delivery method?" Poirot asked. "What else? Box full of fancy sweets on the nightstand, half of them eaten. I've sent them to the laboratory for analysis. Should have results by tomorrow morning." Jameson consulted his notebook. "In the meantime, I've got some interesting facts. That chocolate box, gift from a Mr. Victor Hartley, wine merchant. Been courting the widow for months, according to the servants. You suspect Monsieur Hartley? He's got motive, hasn't he? Wealthy widow, no children of her own. Maybe she was stringing him along, and he got tired of waiting. Or maybe she rejected him, and he didn't take kindly to it. Jameson shrugged. I've sent men to bring him in for questioning. Poirot's moustache twitched. And the nephew, Mr. Gerald Ashworth? In debt up to his eyebrows, from what I hear. Stands to inherit everything now his aunt's dead. The inspector's expression grew grimmer. But here's the thing. He didn't eat any chocolates. Neither did anyone else in the house. Only Mrs. Ashworth. Which suggests the chocolates were specifically targeted at her, I observed. Or that our poisoner got lucky, Jameson countered. Maybe the plan was to kill the whole household, and it just happened that only Mrs. Ashworth indulged. Poirot shook his head slowly. No, Inspector. This crime, it was not random. It was calculated, deliberate. Someone wished Mrs. Ashworth dead, and that someone knew her habits well enough to ensure she alone would consume the poison. Well, that narrows it down to everyone who knew she loved chocolates and slept alone. Jameson snapped his notebook shut. I'm going to interview the staff. You're welcome to sit in, Monsieur Poirot, if you think it'll help. I think I should like first to see the bedroom. The scene of death. It often speaks more eloquently than witnesses. The inspector hesitated, then nodded. Very well, but touch nothing. My men haven't finished processing. Mrs. Ashworth's bedroom was a testament to refined femininity. Pale rose wallpaper, white furniture with gilt accents, a canopied bed hung with embroidered silk. French perfume lingered in the air, mingling uneasily with a sharper chemical scent that I recognized from my war years. The body had been removed, but the bed linens remained, rumpled, twisted, bearing silent witness to the victim's final struggle. On the nightstand sat a crystal water glass, half empty, and a small bottle of aspirin tablets. The chocolate box, of course, was gone. Poirot moved through the room with the delicacy of a cat, his sharp eyes cataloguing every detail. He paused at the dressing table, examining the array of perfume bottles and cosmetic pots. The missing brooch, he murmured. It was kept here, you said? According to Mrs. Ashworth, yes. I watched him open a small jewellery box and rifle carefully through its contents. Anything significant? Perhaps, perhaps not. He held up a folded slip of paper. What have we here? It was a receipt from a jeweller's shop in Hatton Garden. The date was 3 weeks prior, and the item described was one cameo brooch, antique, repair to clasp. She had it repaired, I said, but then where is it now? An excellent question, Hastings. Poirot pocketed the receipt and continued his examination. At the window, he paused, examining the latch. Then he knelt, with evident distaste for the indignity of the posture, and peered beneath the bed. Inspector, he called. Your men, they examined beneath the bed. Jameson appeared in the doorway. Of course, standard procedure. And they found nothing? Nothing but dust. Why? Poirot rose, brushing his trousers with a moue of displeasure. Because I find something most interesting. A chocolate, Inspector. A single chocolate, wrapped in gold foil, lying beneath the bed as though it had rolled there. I peered over his shoulder. Indeed, there it was, a small spherical truffle, its gold wrapper glinting in the morning light. Must have fallen from the box, Jameson said. She probably dropped it. Perhaps. But Poirot's tone suggested he found this explanation unsatisfactory. I should like this chocolate tested along with the others, if you please. and I should like to know its precise position relative to the nightstand. What difference does it make? All differences make a difference, Inspector. That is the nature of detection. Poirot straightened, his expression thoughtful. Now, I should like very much to speak with the maid who discovered the body. And then... His eyes drifted to the chocolate box's empty space on the nightstand. Then I believe we must pay a visit to Monsieur Beaumont, the chocolatier. As we descended the stairs, I ventured a question. What are you thinking, Poirot? Do you believe Hartley did it? My friend paused on the landing, his hand resting on the banister. I believe, Hastings, that this crime is not what it appears. Someone has gone to great trouble to make it seem obvious. The gift of chocolates, the spurned suitor, the convenient poison. He shook his head. It is too neat, too tidy, and Hercule Poirot, he does not trust neatness where murder is concerned. But if not Hartley, then who? Poirot's eyes drifted towards the morning room, where Miss Crane's sobs had subsided into hiccuping silence. That, mon ami, is what the little grey cells must determine. Chapter 3. Bitter Truths. The maid Ellen proved to be a girl of perhaps 19, with reddened eyes and hands that would not stop trembling. We found her in the servants' hall below stairs, seated at the long pine table, with a cup of tea gone cold before her. Mrs. Finch, the cook, a stout woman with iron-grey hair and a face that suggested she tolerated no nonsense, stood guard like a protective mother-hen. "She's had a terrible shock," Mrs. Finch announced before we could speak. "I'm not sure she's fit for more questions." "We shall be brief, madame, I assure you." Poirot drew out a chair and seated himself across from the girl, his manner gentle. "Ellen, is it not? I am Hercule Poirot. I am here to find who did this terrible thing to your mistress." Ellen's lip quivered. "I keep seeing her face, sir. Every time I close my eyes. It was awful, twisted up like she was screaming, but no sound, and her eyes, 'Hush, child!'" Mrs. Finch pressed a fresh handkerchief into the girl's hands. "Take a breath." Poirot waited with uncharacteristic patience. When Ellen had composed herself, he continued. "You brought the tea tray at 7 o'clock. This was your usual routine." "Yes, sir, every morning." Mrs. Ashworth liked her tea prompt at 7, with 2 digestive biscuits and the Morning Post. "And yesterday morning, everything was normal?" "Yes, sir. I knocked, same as always. When she didn't answer, I thought perhaps she was still sleeping. She'd had one of her headaches the night before, you see, so I didn't want to disturb her too much. I opened the door quiet-like and set the tray on the table by the window." "You did not approach the bed immediately?" "No, sir. I went to open the curtains first. That's usually what wakes her, the light. But when I turned round..." Ellen's voice broke. She wasn't moving. And her face, I knew right away something was wrong. I ran to her, touched her hand. Cold as ice, sir. Cold as the grave. I saw Poirot's eyes narrow at this detail. "Cold, you say? And the room? Was it warm or cold?" Ellen blinked at the question. "Cold, sir. The fire had gone out in the night, and the radiator, well, it never works proper in that room. Mrs. Ashworth often complained of it. So the body being cold might simply reflect the temperature of the room." "I suppose so, sir. I'm not one for thinking about such things." "Naturellement." Poirot stroked his moustache thoughtfully. "Now, Ellen, I want you to think very carefully. When you entered the room, did you notice anything out of place, anything unusual, however small?" The girl frowned, concentrating. "The chocolate box was on the nightstand, open, with some of the papers, you know, the little paper cups, empty. And there was her water glass, and her aspirin bottle. The aspirin bottle. Was it open or closed? Open, sir. The cap was off, lying beside it. And the bottle itself, was it full, half empty? Ellen shook her head. I couldn't say, sir. I wasn't looking at such things. I was looking at— She swallowed hard. At her. Of course. One more question, and then I shall leave you in peace. Poirot leaned forward slightly. The chocolates that Mrs. Ashworth received from Mr. Hartley, were they kept always in the drawing-room, or did others have access to them? They were in the drawing-room, sir, on the little table by the French windows. Anyone could have touched them, I suppose. We don't keep that room locked. But I don't know why anyone would. They were just chocolates. Just chocolates, Poirot repeated softly. Yes, thank you, Ellen. You have been most helpful. As we left the servants' hall, I caught Poirot's arm. What significance is there in the aspirin bottle? Perhaps none, perhaps everything. His expression was unreadable. Come, Hastings. We must speak with Monsieur Gerald before Inspector Jameson spirits him away to the police station. We found the nephew in the library, a glass of whisky in his hand despite the early hour. He did not rise when we entered, merely gestured towards the decanter on the sideboard. Help yourselves. God knows I need the fortification. You are distressed by your aunt's death, Poirot observed. Gerald laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. Distressed? My aunt is dead, Monsieur Poirot, murdered, in her own bed. And I'm quite certain that Inspector Jameson considers me his prime suspect. He drained his glass. So, yes, I am distressed. You inherit her estate, I understand. Straight to the point, aren't you? Gerald rose and refilled his glass with an unsteady hand. Yes, I inherit everything. The house, the investments, the art collection, all of it comes to me. Which gives me a splendid motive for murder, doesn't it? It gives you a motive, Poirot agreed calmly. Whether it is sufficient motive for murder, that is another question entirely. Gerald turned to face us, and I saw something shift in his expression, a vulnerability beneath the practiced cynicism. I didn't kill her. I know how that sounds coming from the man who stands to gain everything. But my aunt was the only family I had left. The only person who— He stopped, jaw tightening. Who what, monsieur? Who believed I might amount to something? Gerald sank into a leather armchair, suddenly looking much younger than his years. Everyone else had written me off. My father's creditors, my so-called friends, society at large. But Aunt Millicent took me in, gave me a home, told me I had potential, if only I would apply myself. He stared into his whisky. I was going to prove her right. I had plans, business ventures, I just needed time. And money, perhaps? Gerald's eyes flashed. If you're asking whether I was sponging off her, the answer is yes, but I would never have harmed her, never. Poirot regarded him steadily. Where were you last evening, between 9 o'clock and midnight? At my club, White's. I dined there and played cards until nearly 1 in the morning. Dozens of witnesses. He smiled grimly. I may be a disappointment, Monsieur Poirot, but I'm not a fool. If I were planning to murder my aunt, I would certainly have arranged a better alibi than the truth. The truth being that you were gambling. The truth being that I was losing money I don't have. Gerald set down his glass. There, you wanted honesty. Now you have it. Poirot rose. One more question, if you please. The chocolates your aunt received from Mr. Hartley. Did you see them arrive? I was present when the delivery came, yes. A liveried messenger from Beaumont's, very smart. Miss Crane received the box and brought it to my aunt in the drawing-room. And you did not sample them yourself? I don't care for sweets." Gerald grimaced. "Childhood aversion. My nanny used to force chocolates on me as rewards for good behaviour. Put me off them for life." "How fortunate for you," Poirot murmured. "That is all, monsieur. For now." As we left the library, I grabbed Poirot's elbow. "Well, do you believe him?" "I believe he is telling the truth about his whereabouts. That can be easily verified." As for the rest, Poirot shrugged. "He is a weak man, Hastings. Weak men are capable of many things when cornered. But murder requires a certain resolve. I am not convinced Gerald Ashworth possesses it." Our next stop was the morning room, where Miss Crane had regained sufficient composure to receive us. She sat rigidly upright now, her notebook open on her lap, as though taking refuge in the habits of her profession. "Miss Crane," Poirot began, settling into a chair opposite her. "You have been with Mrs. Ashworth for 3 years, you said. You knew her well." "As well as anyone, I think." Miss Crane's voice was steadier now, though her eyes remained red-rimmed. "She was a private person in many ways, but she confided in me, trusted me. She spoke to you of personal matters, her relationships, her concerns." A faint blush crept up Miss Crane's pale cheeks. "Sometimes. She spoke of Mr. Hartley, occasionally." "Ah, and what did she say of him?" The blush deepened. She was fond of him, genuinely fond, but she was also cautious. Her marriage to Mr. Ashworth had been arranged by their families, you see, a society match rather than a love match. She told me she had never known real passion, real romance, and she was afraid that at her age she might mistake gratitude for affection. Gratitude? Mr. Hartley was very attentive, very persistent. He made her feel desired, I suppose. After years of widowhood, that was flattering. But Mrs. Ashworth was not a foolish woman. She knew that her fortune was part of her appeal. She suspected Monsieur Hartley of mercenary motives. She wondered about it, that's all. Miss Crane twisted her handkerchief. But she never said anything unkind about him. She liked him truly. I think she was working up the courage to accept his proposal. He had proposed. Not formally, but everyone expected it. The servants gossiped about it constantly. Poirot leaned forward. "And Mr. Gerald, how did he feel about the prospect of his aunt remarrying?" Miss Crane hesitated. "He was concerned." "Concerned? If Mrs. Ashworth married Mr. Hartley, her will might change. Gerald's inheritance was not guaranteed." She dropped her eyes. "But that doesn't mean he—" "I can't believe Gerald would— You are fond of him, perhaps?" The question struck home. Miss Crane's blush flared crimson, and she looked away. "He has been kind to me. When others in this household treated me as invisible, Gerald saw me, spoke to me as an equal." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But that is all. There is nothing improper between us. There never could be. A man like him, a woman like me, it's impossible. And yet the heart, it does not always respect what is possible." Miss Crane said nothing. Her silence spoke volumes. "One final question," Poirot said gently. "The chocolates from Monsieur Beaumont. You received the delivery, I am told. Did you open the box? Examine its contents. No. The box was sealed with ribbon and wax. I brought it directly to Mrs. Ashworth. She opened it herself. And the card? There was a card accompanying the gift. Yes, it said, Miss Crane consulted some internal memory. For my dearest Millicent, with affection and hope. Victor. In Monsieur Hartley's handwriting? I assume so. I'm not familiar with his hand." Poirot rose, and I followed suit. "Thank you, Miss Crane. You have been most illuminating." As we stepped into the hallway, Poirot paused, his gaze distant. Hastings, we must visit 2 establishments this afternoon. First, the chocolatier Beaumont, and second," he smiled thinly, "the jeweller in Hatton Garden." "The jeweller? But what has the missing brooch to do with poisoned chocolates?" "Perhaps nothing, perhaps everything." Poirot straightened his coat. "In the art of detection, mon ami, one must follow every thread, even those that seem to lead nowhere. For sometimes the most insignificant detail, it is the key that unlocks the entire mystery." I did not fully understand his meaning then, but I would come to understand it soon enough. Chapter 4. The Confectioner's Trail. The premises of Beaumont et Fils occupied a discreet corner of Bond Street, its façade painted in elegant dove grey with gold lettering that whispered rather than shouted its presence. A single window displayed an artful arrangement of chocolate boxes, each one a small treasure chest of confectionery delights. It was the sort of establishment that did not advertise. Its reputation was sufficient to draw the discerning customer. A bell chimed softly as we entered, and I found myself inhaling the rich, intoxicating aroma of fine chocolate. The interior was all dark wood and glass cases, behind which nestled row upon row of exquisite confections. A young woman in a crisp white apron looked up from arranging truffles and smiled professionally. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. How may I assist you?" "We wish to speak with Monsieur Beaumont himself," Poirot announced, "on a matter of some urgency." The girl's smile faltered. "I'm afraid Monsieur Beaumont is very busy. If you would care to leave your card, tell him it concerns a delivery made to Mrs. Millicent Ashworth of Eaton Square." Poirot's voice carried quiet authority. "And tell him also that Hercule Poirot awaits." The name worked its magic. Within moments we were ushered through a door marked private and into a small but immaculate office. The man who rose to greet us was not what I had expected. Monsieur Beaumont was young, no more than 35, with the dark eyes and olive complexion of his French ancestry, but dressed in the sober English fashion of a successful businessman. "Monsieur Poirot." He extended his hand, his expression guarded. "I have heard of you, of course. Your reputation precedes you. Please sit down. May I offer you chocolate? Coffee?" "Coffee would be most welcome, and perhaps a small sample of your celebrated violet creams." If Beaumont found the request odd, he gave no sign. He rang for his assistant and issued quiet instructions before turning back to us. "You mentioned Mrs. Ashworth. I confess I have been expecting a visit from the police. The news of her death," he shook his head, "it is terrible, simply terrible. She was one of my most valued customers." "You knew her personally?" "As well as one knows any regular patron. She visited my shop perhaps once a month, always selecting her own chocolates with great care. She had exquisite taste." Beaumont's voice carried genuine regret. "When I heard she had died, and that chocolates were involved, you must understand, Monsieur Poirot. My family has been making confections for 4 generations. Our reputation is everything. If there is any suggestion that my chocolates caused her death, that is precisely what I am here to determine." Poirot accepted the coffee cup the assistant placed before him and took a delicate sip. "The box delivered to Mrs. Ashworth on Tuesday last. Tell me everything about its preparation." Beaumont nodded, visibly relieved to be dealing with specifics. "The order was placed by Mr. Victor Hartley. He is also a regular customer, has been purchasing from us for several years. He telephoned on Monday afternoon and requested our finest assortment, with particular emphasis on violet creams. He mentioned they were a gift for a lady. He specified Mrs. Ashworth by name. He gave her address for delivery, yes. And he asked that we include a gift card, which he dictated over the telephone." Poirot's eyebrows rose. He dictated the message. He did not write it himself. That is our standard practice for telephone orders. My assistant transcribes the message onto one of our printed cards. Beaumont spread his hands. We strive for elegance and consistency in all things. I see. And the chocolates themselves, who prepared them? I did, personally. When Mr. Hartley's name appeared on the order, I knew it would be important. He is a particular customer, very demanding. I selected each chocolate myself and arranged them in the box. And the box remained in your possession until delivery. It was sealed with our signature ribbon and wax, then placed in our cold storage until the messenger collected it the following morning. Beaumont's expression grew earnest. Monsieur Poirot, I must emphasize, from the moment those chocolates left my hands until they were delivered to Ashworth House, they were never unsealed. My messenger is bonded and has been with me for 8 years. The integrity of our deliveries is beyond question. The assistant returned with a small plate bearing 3 violet creams. Poirot examined them with the intensity of a scientist studying specimens. These are identical to those delivered to Mrs. Ashworth? From the same batch, yes, made that very morning. Without hesitation, Poirot lifted one to his lips and bit into it. I confess I held my breath, but he merely closed his eyes in appreciation. Exquisite, he pronounced. The crystallized violet. It is genuine, not artificial flavoring. We use only genuine flowers, crystallized in-house according to my grandmother's recipe. Poirot finished the chocolate and dabbed his moustache with a handkerchief. Monsieur Beaumont, I must ask you a delicate question. Is it possible, theoretically, for someone to inject poison into a finished chocolate without leaving visible evidence? Beaumont considered this carefully. Theoretically, yes. A fine needle could penetrate the shell without obvious damage. But to do so consistently across multiple chocolates without detection? That would require considerable skill and access. And if the chocolates were sealed in our box, then tampering must have occurred after delivery. Precisely. Poirot rose, extending his hand. You have been most helpful, monsieur. If the police contact you, I trust you will share this same information. Of course, I have nothing to hide. Beaumont hesitated. Monsieur Poirot, will this ruin me? The newspapers, they are already speculating. Death by chocolate, one headline said. My family's name. Justice will exonerate those who are innocent, Poirot said gently. This I promise you. As we emerged onto Bond Street, I turned to my friend. Well, do you believe him? I believe the chocolates left his shop untampered, which means the poison was introduced at Ashworth House by someone with access to the box between Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday night. That's practically everyone in the household. Précisément. Poirot hailed a passing taxi. And now, Hastings, we visit the jeweller. The case of the missing brooch, it continues to intrigue me. The jeweller's shop in Hatton Garden was a far cry from Beaumont's elegant premises. It occupied a narrow storefront squeezed between a watchmaker and a diamond merchant, its window dusty and cluttered with an assortment of antique pieces. A bell above the door jangled as we entered. The proprietor emerged from a back room, a wizened man with spectacles perched on his forehead and a jeweller's loop dangling from a chain around his neck. He peered at us with the suspicious squint of one accustomed to evaluating both gems and customers. "Help you, gentlemen." Poirot produced the receipt we had found in Mrs. Ashworth's dressing table. "I am inquiring about this repair. A cameo brooch, brought in 3 weeks ago." The jeweller took the receipt, holding it close to his face. Ashworth. Yes, I remember. Beautiful piece, Victorian. The clasp was worn. Simple repair. And it was collected? Last week, Wednesday, I think. He shuffled to a ledger on the counter and ran a gnarled finger down the entries. Yes, Wednesday the 12th. Collected and paid for. By Mrs. Ashworth herself? The jeweller shook his head. By her secretary. Young woman, brown hair, plain dress. She had proper authorization. A note signed by Mrs. Byron Ashworth and the original receipt stub. I felt a jolt of surprise. Miss Crane collected the brooch? If that's her name, yes. Quiet thing. Seemed nervous. Paid in cash and left quickly. Poirot's expression remained impassive, but I could sense his mind working furiously. And you are certain this was Wednesday the 12th? Not some other day? Positive. I mark every transaction in my ledger. Been doing it for 40 years. One more question, monsieur. Did anyone else inquire about this brooch? Before or after it was collected? The jeweller scratched his chin. Now you mention it, there was a gentleman. Day before the lady came. Asked if we'd had any antique cameos in for repair recently. Said he was looking for a particular piece. Family heirloom, he said. I told him we had several, but I couldn't give details without the owner's permission. Can you describe this gentleman? Youngish, well-dressed, bit impatient if I'm honest. Didn't leave a name. The description could fit Gerald Ashworth, or any number of young men in London. But the coincidence was troubling. We thanked the jeweller and stepped back into the grey afternoon. Poirot stood on the pavement, his brow furrowed in concentration. It does not make sense, Hastings, he muttered. Miss Crane collects the brooch on Wednesday. Yet when we visited Ashworth House on Tuesday, the day before, Mrs. Ashworth was already complaining of its disappearance. I stared at him. You're right. She said it had been missing for a week or more. So either Mrs. Ashworth was confused about the timeline, or Miss Crane collected the brooch, but never returned it to her employer. Précisément. Poirot's eyes glittered. And if Miss Crane took the brooch for herself, what else might she have taken? And what might she have done to protect her secret? My mind raced through the implications. You think Miss Crane poisoned the chocolates? But she claimed to be allergic. She never ate them. An allergy is easily feigned, mon ami. And who better to tamper with the box than the person who received it from the messenger and carried it to Mrs. Ashworth? But her grief seemed genuine. Grief and guilt, they often look the same. Poirot began walking, his pace brisk. We must return to Ashworth House. There are questions yet to be answered, and I fear time grows short. What do you mean? Poirot did not answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was grave. The killer, Hastings, believes themselves safe. The police suspect Monsieur Hartley, and the evidence points conveniently in his direction. But Hercule Poirot sees what others do not. And when the killer realizes this, he shook his head. We must move quickly before another tragedy occurs. As our taxi wound through the London streets, I found myself reviewing the facts. Miss Crane, with her devotion to Gerald, her access to the chocolates, her secret theft of the brooch, it all seemed to fit. And yet something nagged at me, some detail I could not quite grasp. Poirot, I noticed, wore the same expression of troubled contemplation. Whatever the truth was, I suspected it would prove far more complex than a lovelorn secretary with sticky fingers. The little grey cells, it seemed, were not yet satisfied. Chapter 5. Layers of Deception. The afternoon light was fading by the time we returned to Ashworth House, casting long shadows across Eaton Square. A chill had settled into the air, and I turned up my collar against the wind as we mounted the steps. Hopkins admitted us with his customary dignity, though I fancied his composure had frayed somewhat since morning. Dark circles beneath his eyes suggested a man who had not slept. "Inspector Jameson has departed, sir," he informed Poirot. "He has taken Mr. Hartley to the station for formal questioning. Mr. Gerald is in the library, and Miss Crane has retired to her room with a headache." "A headache," Poirot repeated thoughtfully. "Most convenient. But it is you I wish to speak with first, Hopkins. You have been with this household for 30 years. I understand. 32 years this April, sir." A flicker of pride crossed the butler's face. "I began as a footman under Mr. Ashworth's father. Then you knew Mrs. Ashworth before she was Mrs. Ashworth." "I did, sir. She came to this house as a bride of 20. A beautiful young woman, if I may say so, and kind, always kind to the staff." Poirot guided him gently towards the servants' hall, where we might speak without interruption. I followed, notebook at the ready. "Tell me, Hopkins, in recent months did you observe any changes in Mrs. Ashworth's behaviour, her habits, her relationships with members of the household?" The butler considered this carefully. "She seemed troubled, sir. These past few weeks especially. The matter of the missing items weighed heavily upon her. She did not wish to suspect anyone, and yet suspicion is corrosive, no? It eats at trust. Precisely, sir." Hopkins lowered his voice. "If I may speak frankly." "I insist upon it. Mrs. Ashworth confided in me just once last week that she feared the thefts were not random. She believed someone in the household was testing her, seeing what they could take without consequence. Testing her? For what purpose? She did not say, but she mentioned changing her will. Said she had been too generous, perhaps, and that generosity had bred expectation rather than gratitude." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Did she specify who might be affected by these changes?" Hopkins hesitated. "She did not name names, sir, but I formed my own impressions." "Which were, Mr. Gerald has been increasingly agitated of late. His debts, I understand, are substantial. And Miss Crane," the butler paused, choosing his words with care. "Miss Crane has become rather attached to Mr. Gerald. More attached, perhaps, than is proper for someone in her position. You disapprove? It is not my place to approve or disapprove, sir, but I observe, and what I observe troubles me." Poirot nodded slowly. "One more question, Hopkins. The evening Mrs. Ashworth died, you served dinner as usual?" "Yes, sir. Mrs. Ashworth dined alone. Mr. Gerald was at his club, and Miss Crane took a tray in her room, claiming she was unwell." "Unwell? This was before Mrs. Ashworth retired with her headache?" "Yes, sir. Miss Crane excused herself around 7 o'clock. Mrs. Ashworth dined at 8, then retired early, around 9, as I mentioned." "And the chocolate box? Where was it during dinner?" "In the drawing room, sir, where it had been since its arrival. I saw it myself when I closed the curtains at 6:30. Was the box open or closed at that time?" Hopkins frowned. "Closed, sir. I remember because the ribbon was still tied. Mrs. Ashworth had shown the chocolates to visitors earlier. Mrs. Pemberton and Lady Halstead called for tea, but she had replaced the lid and retied the ribbon." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "She retied the ribbon? You are certain of this?" "Quite certain, sir. It caught my attention because the bow was somewhat lopsided. Mrs. Ashworth was usually meticulous about such things. Most interesting. Poirot stroked his moustache. Thank you, Hopkins. You have been invaluable. We left the butler and made our way upstairs. At the door to Miss Crane's room, Poirot paused. I think, Hastings, that Mademoiselle Crane's headache must be interrupted. There are questions she must answer. He knocked firmly. After a long moment, the door opened to reveal Miss Crane, her face pale and drawn. She had removed her plain brown jacket, but still wore the serviceable grey dress beneath. Her eyes widened when she saw us. Monsieur Poirot, I was not expecting, that is, I'm unwell. Forgive the intrusion, mademoiselle, but the matter is urgent. Poirot's tone brooked no argument. May we enter? She stepped back reluctantly, allowing us into a small but tidy room. A narrow bed, a writing desk, a wardrobe, the quarters of a dependent, comfortable but not luxurious. On the desk lay her ever-present notebook, and beside it a photograph in a silver frame. Poirot moved to examine the photograph. It showed a younger Miss Crane standing beside an elderly woman who bore a striking resemblance to her. Your mother? My grandmother. Miss Crane's voice softened. She raised me after my parents died. She passed away 4 years ago. That photograph is all I have left of her. My condolences. Poirot turned to face her, his expression gentle but implacable. Miss Crane, I must ask you about the cameo brooch. The effect was immediate. What little colour remained in her face drained away, and she sank onto the edge of the bed as though her legs would no longer support her. How did you? She stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth. I visited the jeweller in Hatton Garden. He confirmed that you collected the brooch on Wednesday the 12th, the day after we first visited this house. Yet, when we spoke with Mrs. Ashworth, she claimed the brooch had been missing for over a week. Miss Crane was trembling now. I can explain. Please do. Mrs. Ashworth asked me to collect it. She gave me the receipt and a signed note, but when I returned, she drew a shaky breath. She had gone out. I placed the brooch on her dressing table, where it belonged. I swear I did. And yet it was not there when the police searched her room. I don't understand it. I put it there myself, in the little jewellery box where she always kept it. Someone must have taken it afterwards. Poirot regarded her steadily. And you did not think to mention this to anyone? Not even after Mrs. Ashworth's death? I was frightened. The words burst out of her. Don't you see? The brooch disappears, and then Mrs. Ashworth dies, and everyone is talking about poison and murder. If I admitted I was the last person to handle the brooch, they would think I was the thief. Or worse. The thief, Poirot repeated softly. Or worse. Yes, I see your dilemma. He moved to the window, gazing out at the grey London sky. When he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. Miss Crane, I must ask you some difficult questions about Mr. Gerald. I saw her flinch. What about him? You are fond of him, are you not? Perhaps more than fond. She looked away. My feelings are not relevant. On the contrary, in a murder investigation, all feelings are relevant. Poirot turned back to face her. Mr. Gerald's financial situation is precarious. If Mrs. Ashworth had changed her will, disinherited him perhaps, in favour of a new husband, what would become of him? She would never have done that. She loved Gerald. But she was considering marriage to Monsieur Hartley, and she had spoken of changing her will. Miss Crane's eyes widened. How do you know that? I know many things, mademoiselle. What I do not yet know is who murdered Mrs. Ashworth, but I am beginning to form a theory." He stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "On the evening of the murder, you retired early. Around 7 o'clock, claiming illness. Where were you between 7 and 9? "In my room. Here. I had a headache, a real one, and I took aspirin and lay down." "Did anyone see you during that time?" "Ellen brought me tea around 7:30. After that, I was alone until morning." "And the chocolate box? Did you touch it at any point after it arrived?" "I received it from the messenger and carried it to Mrs. Ashworth in the drawing-room. That was all." Miss Crane's voice rose defensively. "I never touched it again. I couldn't have poisoned those chocolates. I wasn't anywhere near them." Poirot nodded slowly. "Very well. One final question. The aspirin bottle in Mrs. Ashworth's room. Do you know anything about it?" "Only that she kept it on her nightstand. She suffered from headaches frequently." "Did she take aspirin often?" "Almost every evening. She said it helped her sleep." Something flickered in Poirot's eyes. That spark I had come to recognize as the moment of revelation. He was very still for a long moment, then nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "Thank you, Miss Crane. You have been most helpful." We left her sitting on the bed, her face a mask of fear and confusion. In the hallway, I seized Poirot's arm. "What is it? What have you realized?" "The aspirin, Hastings." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Ashworth took aspirin every evening. It was her habit, her routine. Everyone in the household knew this." So perhaps the chocolates were not the murder weapon at all. Perhaps they were merely, how do you say, the distraction, the misdirection. I stared at him. "You mean the poison was in the aspirin?" "Consider, mon ami. Cyanide is bitter, yes, but a single tablet, crushed and mixed with aspirin powder, might go unnoticed. Mrs. Ashworth takes her nightly aspirin, suffers sudden distress, reaches for her chocolates as comfort, and the chocolates take the blame. Précisément." Poirot's expression was grim. "We must speak with Inspector Jameson immediately. The aspirin bottle must be tested, and if I am correct, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. If Poirot was correct, then the entire investigation had been led astray from the beginning. The chocolates, the gift from Hartley, Miss Crane's suspicious behavior, all of it had been designed to obscure the simple, deadly truth. Someone had poisoned the aspirin, and that someone had been patient enough, cold-blooded enough, to wait for Mrs. Ashworth's own habits to kill her. We were dealing with a murderer of exceptional cunning. The question remained, who? Chapter 6. The Final Taste. Inspector Jameson was not pleased to be summoned back to Ashworth House. He arrived with the weary irritation of a man who believed his case already solved, his ginger whiskers bristling with impatience. "This had better be important, Monsieur Poirot. I've got Hartley sweating nicely in an interview room. Another hour, and I'll have a confession." "You will have nothing of the kind," Poirot replied calmly, "because Monsieur Hartley did not murder Mrs. Ashworth." Jameson's eyes narrowed. The chocolates were not the murder weapon. They were, how shall I say, the theatre. The performance designed to distract from the truth. Poirot gestured towards the stairs. "Come, I will show you." We ascended to Mrs. Ashworth's bedroom, which remained sealed with police tape. Jameson broke the seal with evident reluctance and followed us inside. The room was unchanged from that morning. The twisted bedclothes, the empty nightstand, the lingering chemical smell. "The aspirin bottle," Poirot said, pointing to where it had stood. "Your men took it as evidence, yes?" "Standard procedure, along with the water glass and the chocolates." And have you tested the aspirin?" Jameson frowned. "Why would we? The chocolates are obviously—" "Nothing is obvious, Inspector. That is the first lesson of detection." Poirot's voice sharpened. "I urge you most strongly to have that aspirin analyzed for cyanide. I believe you will find it there, not in the chocolates." "That's absurd. The chocolates were a gift from Hartley. He had motive. Means he had motive, yes. But means? Consider, Inspector." Poirot began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. "The chocolates were prepared by Monsieur Beaumont, a reputable chocolatier. They were sealed and delivered directly to this house. Monsieur Hartley never touched them. He could have had an accomplice at the shop. There is no evidence of tampering before delivery. The box was sealed with ribbon and wax. Miss Crane received it and brought it directly to Mrs. Ashworth." Poirot stopped pacing. If the chocolates were poisoned, it happened here, in this house, by someone with access. Jameson's frown deepened. "Miss Crane, then. She received the box and was observed carrying it directly to her employer. Moreover, Miss Crane claims an allergy to chocolate, a claim easily verified by questioning her physician. She had no opportunity to tamper with the chocolates without being observed. Then who?" Poirot smiled thinly. "That is the question, is it not? But consider an alternative scenario. What if the chocolates were never poisoned at all? What if they were merely present? A convenient scapegoat for a murder committed by other means." I watched Jameson's expression shift from irritation to uncertainty. "Go on. Mrs. Ashworth suffered from chronic headaches. Every evening, without fail, she took aspirin before bed. This was known to everyone in the household. Family, staff, even regular visitors. It was her routine, her habit. You're suggesting someone poisoned the aspirin instead. I'm suggesting it is possible. Cyanide is bitter, yes, but ground into powder and mixed with aspirin, perhaps only 1 or 2 tablets adulterated, it might go unnoticed until too late." Poirot's voice grew grave. "Mrs. Ashworth takes her nightly aspirin. Within minutes, she feels unwell. Perhaps she reaches for a chocolate, thinking sugar might help. Perhaps she eats several, desperately seeking comfort as the poison takes hold. And when she is found dead, surrounded by chocolates, everyone blames the chocolates," I finished. "Précisément, Hastings." Jameson was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled out his notebook and began writing furiously. "I'll have the laboratory test the aspirin immediately, if you're right. If I am right, then your case against Monsieur Hartley collapses. The chocolates become irrelevant, and we must look elsewhere for our murderer." "But who had access to the aspirin?" Poirot moved to the nightstand, examining the space where the bottle had stood. "Anyone who entered this room. Mrs. Ashworth was not suspicious by nature. She did not lock her door. A servant making the bed, a family member paying a visit, a secretary delivering correspondence. Any of them might have tampered with the bottle unobserved. That doesn't narrow it down much. No, but it changes the question we must ask." Poirot turned to face us, his eyes glittering. "We have been asking who had opportunity to poison the chocolates. Now we must ask, who had knowledge of Mrs. Ashworth's aspirin habit? Who had access to her bedroom? And most importantly, who had reason to ensure that suspicion fell on Monsieur Hartley?" I felt a chill run down my spine. Someone wanted to frame Hartley? Consider Hastings. If Mrs. Ashworth had simply died of apparent natural causes, there would be questions. An autopsy, perhaps. Investigation. But if she dies surrounded by poisoned chocolates sent by a known suitor, then the case solves itself. The police arrest Hartley. and the true murderer escapes undetected. That's diabolically clever, Jameson admitted grudgingly. It is the work of a careful mind, a patient mind, someone who understood Mrs. Ashworth's habits intimately and planned accordingly. Poirot paused. Someone who knew about Hartley's courtship and saw an opportunity. Gerald Ashworth, I said. He inherits everything. He knew about the chocolates. He was present when they arrived. An obvious choice, perhaps too obvious. Poirot shook his head. No, Hastings, we must dig deeper. He moved to the dressing table, running his fingers along its polished surface. The brooch, he murmured. It continues to trouble me. What about it? Jameson asked. Mrs. Ashworth believed valuable items were being stolen from this house. A photograph frame, earrings, and finally her mother's cameo brooch. She was distressed enough to summon me for consultation. Poirot opened the small jewellery box and peered inside. Yet the brooch was not stolen at all. It was at the jeweller's, being repaired. Miss Crane collected it and claims to have returned it, but it is not here now. Maybe she kept it, Jameson suggested. She's already admitted to suspicious behaviour. Perhaps, but consider another possibility. Poirot's voice grew soft. What if the thefts were not thefts at all? What if they were designed to create an atmosphere of suspicion, to make Mrs. Ashworth doubt her household, distrust those around her? Psychological warfare, I said. Exactly. Someone was undermining Mrs. Ashworth's peace of mind, making her feel unsafe in her own home. And when she was sufficiently destabilized, they struck. Poirot nodded gravely. The murder was not impulsive. It was the culmination of a campaign. The thefts, the tensions, the manipulation of relationships, all leading to this moment. Jameson snapped his notebook shut. I need to test that aspirin, and I want everyone in this house questioned again, properly this time. I would suggest, Inspector, that you examine the household accounts as well. Financial records often reveal what words conceal. You suspect embezzlement. I suspect nothing. I merely observe that where there is murder for inheritance, there is often a trail of smaller crimes preceding it. After Jameson departed, Poirot and I returned to the drawing room. The chocolate box's absence left a conspicuous gap on the side table. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his expression distant. You know who did it, I said. It was not a question. I suspect, Hastings. I do not yet know. He turned to face me. There is one piece of evidence I require. One detail that will confirm everything. What is it? The gift card. The one that accompanied the chocolates. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Inspector Jameson will have it among the evidence. I must examine it. The card. But it was dictated over the telephone. Beaumont's assistant wrote it. Precisely. And yet someone knew exactly what it would say. Someone knew that Hartley was ordering chocolates for Mrs. Ashworth. Someone knew the perfect opportunity had arrived. I stared at him. You think someone intercepted the order? I think, mon ami, that Monsieur Hartley may not have placed that order at all. The implications were staggering. But Beaumont said a man claiming to be Victor Hartley telephoned on Monday afternoon and dictated an order. He assumed it was genuine because Hartley was a regular customer. Poirot's voice dropped. But what if it was not Hartley? What if someone impersonated him, ordered the chocolates and arranged for them to be delivered as a gift? A gift that would make Hartley appear guilty when Mrs. Ashworth died. Good God! We must verify this immediately. Monsieur Hartley must be asked whether he placed that order. If he denies it, the drawing-room door burst open. It was Hopkins, his usual composure entirely shattered. Monsieur Poirot, Come quickly. It's Miss Crane. She's collapsed in the hallway." We rushed from the room to find Miss Crane sprawled at the foot of the stairs, her face pale as death, her body convulsing. Ellen knelt beside her, weeping hysterically. "She came down for tea," the maid sobbed. "She took one sip and then—" Poirot's gaze fell upon the teacup, lying shattered on the floor, its contents pooling on the marble tiles. His expression hardened. "Do not touch anything! Hopkins, summon a doctor immediately, and the police!" He knelt beside Miss Crane, pressing his fingers to her throat. "She lives, but barely." I stared at the spilled tea, at the unconscious woman, at the chaos erupting around us. The killer struck again. "No, Hastings." Poirot's voice was ice. "The killer is tying up loose ends. Miss Crane knows something, or the murderer believes she does. We are running out of time." He rose, his face set with grim determination. "Tonight, this ends. I will gather everyone in this house, and before dawn breaks, the truth will be revealed." Chapter 7. The Unmasking. The drawing-room of Ashworth House had never felt so oppressive. A fire blazed in the grate, yet the warmth could not dispel the chill that hung over the assembled company. Outside, darkness had fallen, and rain lashed against the French windows like impatient fingers demanding entry. Inspector Jameson stood by the door, his notebook ready, his expression sceptical but attentive. Beside him, a uniformed constable maintained a watchful presence. The household had gathered as Poirot requested, though gathered perhaps suggests too voluntary an action. They had been summoned, and none had dared refuse. Gerald Ashworth occupied the armchair nearest the fire, a glass of whisky untouched in his hand. His earlier bravado had evaporated. He looked haggard, diminished, a man watching his world crumble. Beside him, Victor Hartley sat stiffly on the settee, having been released from custody at Poirot's insistence. His honest face bore the marks of his ordeal, confusion, indignation, and beneath it all, genuine grief for the woman he had loved. Hopkins stood near the sideboard, his posture rigid with professional dignity even in crisis. Mrs. Finch, the cook, had been permitted to attend at Poirot's request, her stout form wedged into a corner chair, her face a mask of wary curiosity. Ellen, the housemaid, perched on a footstool, still red-eyed from weeping. Miss Crane was absent. She remained upstairs, attended by a physician who had pronounced her condition serious but stable. The poison in her tea had been a smaller dose than that which killed Mrs. Ashworth, perhaps hastily administered. She would live, though she had not yet regained consciousness. Poirot stood before the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows across his immaculate evening dress. He had changed for the occasion, as was his habit for such moments. This was, after all, a performance, and Hercule Poirot understood the importance of theatre. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice cutting through the tense silence like a blade through silk. "We are gathered here to unveil a truth that has lain hidden beneath layers of deception. The murder of Mrs. Millicent Ashworth was not a crime of passion or impulse. It was a calculated execution, planned with patience and executed with precision." Gerald shifted uncomfortably. Must we endure this theatrical display? We all know who's responsible. Hartley sent the poisoned chocolates. The chocolates were not poisoned. Monsieur. Poirot's interruption was gentle but absolute. The laboratory results arrived an hour ago. Every chocolate in that box was tested. Not one contained any trace of cyanide or any other toxic substance. A ripple of shock passed through the room. Hartley's face flooded with relief. Gerald's mouth opened, then closed again. "But if not the chocolates," Ellen began. "The aspirin, mademoiselle. Mrs. Ashworth's nightly aspirin tablets. 3 of them had been adulterated with potassium cyanide. Enough to kill, but disguised among the ordinary tablets so that discovery would be delayed, perhaps indefinitely." "My God," Hopkins breathed. Mrs. Ashworth took her aspirin as usual that evening. Within minutes, the poison began its terrible work. In her distress, she reached for comfort, the chocolates beside her bed. She consumed several before the end came. Poirot's voice softened. The chocolates were innocent bystanders, framed for a murder they did not commit. "Then Hartley is innocent," Jameson said slowly. "Monsieur Hartley is entirely innocent, and not merely of murder." Poirot turned to the wine merchant. "Monsieur, I must ask you directly. Did you place an order with Beaumont's chocolatier on Monday afternoon?" Hartley shook his head, bewilderment plain on his features. "I intended to order chocolates for Millicent. I always did for special occasions, but I hadn't yet. I was planning to visit the shop personally on Wednesday. I wanted to select them myself. And yet Beaumont received a telephone order on Monday, ostensibly from you, requesting their finest assortment with emphasis on violet creams. That wasn't me. I never made that call." Poirot nodded, as though this confirmed what he already knew. "Someone impersonated you, monsieur. Someone who knew you were a regular customer of Beaumont's, who knew of your courtship with Mrs. Ashworth, who knew that a gift of chocolates from you would not be questioned. They placed the order, dictated a message of affection, and arranged for the delivery, all to ensure that when Mrs. Ashworth died, suspicion would fall squarely upon you." "But who?" Hartley demanded. "Who would do such a thing? That is the question we must now answer." Poirot began to move slowly around the room, his sharp eyes touching each face in turn. "Let us consider who benefited from Mrs. Ashworth's death." He paused before Gerald. "Monsieur Gerald, you inherit everything, the house, the investments, the art collection. Your financial difficulties would be solved at a stroke." Gerald flushed. "I've already told you. I was at my club until 1 in the morning. Dozens of witnesses. An alibi for the time of death, yes. But the aspirin could have been poisoned at any point in the preceding days. Your alibi proves nothing." Poirot tilted his head. "However, there is another consideration. You do not care for chocolates. A childhood aversion, you said. If you wished to poison your aunt, you would choose a method that could not accidentally harm yourself. The aspirin is a clever choice for someone who avoids sweets." Gerald's face paled. "Now see here." "And yet," Poirot continued, moving on, "there are difficulties with this theory. You are a weak man, Monsieur Gérald. Forgive my frankness, but not, I think, a patient one. This crime required months of preparation. The campaign of small thefts, the psychological destabilization of Mrs. Ashworth, the careful framing of Monsieur Hartley. This is not the work of a man who cannot pay his gambling debts." "Then who?" Jameson pressed. Poirot stopped before the sideboard, where Hopkins stood at rigid attention. "Let us consider the household staff. Hopkins, you have served this family for 32 years. You knew Mrs. Ashworth's habits intimately, including her nightly aspirin ritual." "I would never harm Mrs. Ashworth," the butler said, his voice steady despite a slight tremor in his hands. "She was the finest mistress I have ever served. I believe you. Your grief is genuine, your loyalty beyond question." Poirot moved on. "Mrs. Finch, Ellen, you both had access to Mrs. Ashworth's bedroom. You could have tampered with the aspirin." Mrs. Finch bristled. I've been with this household 15 years. I'd sooner cut off my own hand. Peace, madame. I do not accuse you." Poirot's voice gentled. "Neither you nor Ellen had motive. You were well treated, well paid, secure in your positions. Murder would only endanger your livelihoods." He turned back to face the room, his expression growing grave. "No, the murderer is someone with motive, means, and opportunity. Someone who benefited from Mrs. Ashworth's death. Someone who knew her habits intimately. Someone who had reason to fear her continued existence." "Miss Crane," Gerald said suddenly. "She's the one who collected the brooch and claims to have returned it. She received the chocolates from the messenger. Miss Crane is currently fighting for her life upstairs, having been poisoned by someone in this house." Poirot's voice was sharp. "She is a victim, not a perpetrator. And that attempt on her life tells us something crucial. The killer is present in this room and feared what Miss Crane might reveal." A terrible silence fell. I saw eyes dart from face to face, suspicion flowering like poison. "I said earlier that we must ask who benefited from Mrs. Ashworth's death," Poirot continued, "but we must also ask who benefited from Monsieur Hartley's arrest, whose interests were served by framing an innocent man." He moved to the centre of the room, commanding attention through sheer force of presence. Mrs. Ashworth was considering marriage to Monsieur Hartley. This was known to everyone in the household. If she married, her will would likely change. Mr. Gerald's inheritance would be threatened. The household staff might be displaced. Everything would change. "So, we're back to Gerald," Jameson said. "Not necessarily." Poirot held up a finger. "There is another who would be displaced by Mrs. Ashworth's remarriage. Someone whose position depended entirely on Mrs. Ashworth's continued widowhood. Someone who had grown comfortable, perhaps too comfortable, in this house." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a note of profound sadness. "Someone who had access to Mrs. Ashworth's bedroom at any hour. Someone who knew her aspirin habit. Someone who collected the brooch from the jeweller and kept it." "Miss Crane," Gerald repeated, but uncertainty crept into his voice. "No, monsieur, not Miss Crane." Poirot shook his head slowly. "Miss Crane was a pawn, manipulated by someone cleverer than herself. Her feelings for you were known and exploited." I felt the hairs rise on the back of my neck. Something was shifting in the room, some understanding dawning. "The killer needed a scapegoat," Poirot continued. "First Monsieur Hartley, through the chocolates. But if that failed, there was a secondary target, Miss Crane, with her suspicious behaviour, her collection of the brooch, her access to the chocolates. The killer cultivated her as a fallback, nurturing her secrets, positioning her to take the blame." "Who?" Hartley demanded. "For God's sake, who?" Poirot's gaze settled on a point near the sideboard. On Hopkins, whose rigid composure had begun to crack. No, not Hopkins. On the person standing just behind him, half hidden in the shadows of the corner. On Mrs. Finch. "You, madame," Poirot said softly. "You are the killer." For a moment, the cook did not react. Then, slowly, her expression shifted. The mask of motherly concern dissolved, revealing something cold and hard beneath. "You're mad," she said flatly. "I'm the cook. Why would I murder Mrs. Ashworth?" "Because you are not merely the cook." Poirot's voice was relentless. "You are Agnes Finch, formerly Agnes Ashworth, the illegitimate daughter of Mrs. Ashworth's late husband, born to a housemaid who was dismissed without reference when her condition became known." The room erupted. Gerald shot to his feet. Hopkins staggered back in shock. Jameson fumbled for his notebook. "That's impossible," Gerald shouted. My uncle had no illegitimate children. He had one. Hidden, denied, forgotten. Poirot's gaze never left Mrs. Finch. You came to this house 15 years ago, using your mother's maiden name, seeking what? Revenge, recognition, justice. Mrs. Finch, Agnes, stood very still. Her hands, I noticed, had curled into fists at her sides. My mother died in poverty, she said, and her voice had changed, harder, colder, stripped of pretense, cast out like rubbish because she dared to love above her station. While the Ashworths lived in luxury, we starved. While they hosted their precious salons, my mother scrubbed floors to keep us alive. So you came here, inserted yourself into the household, waited 15 years. A terrible smile crossed her face. I watched and waited. I learned their secrets, their habits, their weaknesses. I was invisible, the cook, below notice, beneath contempt, and all the while I planned. The thefts, Poirot said. Small items at first, building to the brooch. You wished to destabilize Mrs. Ashworth, make her doubt her household. She doubted everyone except me, the invisible servant, the faithful cook. Agnes laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. When Miss Crane collected the brooch, I took it from Mrs. Ashworth's room that same evening. Let the girl take the blame. And the aspirin. Child's play. I prepared Mrs. Ashworth's evening tray every night. A few tablets, carefully doctored, slipped into the bottle. She never noticed, never suspected. The chocolates from Monsieur Hartley. You placed that order. From a public telephone, yes. I knew Hartley was courting her, knew about his regular orders from Beaumont's. When the chocolates arrived, suspicion would fall on him, the perfect crime. But Miss Crane, I burst out, she was innocent. You tried to kill her. Agnes turned her cold gaze on me. She was becoming a liability. Asking questions, noticing things. When Poirot began investigating, I knew she might remember something dangerous. Better to silence her and let her secrets die with her. The tea, Poirot said. You prepared it, knowing she would drink it. Of course, who notices the cook? Inspector Jameson stepped forward, his face grim. Agnes Ashworth, or whatever your name is, I'm arresting you for the murder of Mrs. Millicent Ashworth and the attempted murder of Miss Olivia Crane. For a moment, I thought she would resist. Her eyes flickered towards the door, calculating. Then, with a strange dignity, she straightened her shoulders. It was worth it, she said quietly. Even if I hang. For 15 years, I watched them live in comfort while my mother rotted in her grave. Now they know. The Ashworth name is stained forever. As the constable led her away, the room seemed to exhale. Gerald sank back into his chair, stunned. Hartley buried his face in his hands. Hopkins stood frozen, his world-view shattered. Poirot remained by the fireplace, his expression one of profound weariness. A crime born of old sin, he said softly. The father's transgression, visited upon the innocent. Mrs. Ashworth knew nothing of her husband's illegitimate daughter. She was punished for crimes not her own. The chocolates, I said slowly. They were innocent all along. Innocent, but effective. They served their purpose. Misdirection. We looked at the gift and saw jealousy, courtship, poison. We did not look at the aspirin bottle. Poirot shook his head. The little grey cells. They were nearly deceived. But you saw through it, Jameson admitted grudgingly. How? The timing, Inspector. The symptoms of cyanide poisoning are swift. If Mrs. Ashworth had consumed poisoned chocolates, she would have died within minutes, surrounded by the sweets. But the half-eaten chocolates suggested she was eating them during her distress, not before. She reached for comfort. not death. He moved towards the door, and I followed. "What of Gerald?" I asked quietly. "And Miss Crane?" "Mr. Gerald inherits, as intended. Perhaps the shock of these events will mature him." Poirot's tone suggested doubt. "Miss Crane will recover. Whether she remains in this house, that is for her to decide." Outside, the rain had stopped. Stars were emerging through the dissipating clouds. We stood on the steps of Ashworth House, breathing the clean night air. "A sad case, Hastings," Poirot said finally. "Not a villain truly, a victim who became a monster. The sins of the past, they poison the present as surely as cyanide poisons the body." "Justice is served, at least. Justice." Poirot's voice was soft. "Yes, justice is served. But the chocolates, those beautiful, innocent confections, they will forever be associated with death. And that, mon ami, is perhaps the greatest tragedy of all." I could not argue with that. As we walked into the London night, I found myself reflecting on the strange, sad case of the chocolates of death. A murder wrapped in sweetness, concealed by love, and unveiled at last by the patient brilliance of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. Epilogue. 3 weeks later, I received a box from Beaumont et Fils, a gift from Poirot, with a note in his precise handwriting. "Fear not, mon ami. These I have tested personally. Enjoy." I confess I hesitated before sampling them. But they were, as promised, quite delicious. Miss Crane recovered fully and, to everyone's surprise, accepted a position as companion to Lady Halstead, one of Mrs. Ashworth's friends. Gerald Ashworth, sobered by his brush with suspicion, sold the London house and retired to the countryside, where I am told he has taken up gardening with unexpected enthusiasm. Victor Hartley never fully recovered from the loss of Mrs. Ashworth. He visits her grave each Sunday, bearing flowers, never chocolates. And Agnes Finch, Agnes Ashworth, went to the gallows on a grey March morning, unrepentant to the end. Such is the nature of justice. Such is the nature of murder. And such, as Poirot would say, is the darkness that lurks within the human heart.